everyone. Welcome back to the Wellness Dilemma episode 2. As we talked about in our first episode, we're going to use our time this episode to touch on what is the wellness industry, what do we mean when we talk about that, and what are some of the harms that happen in this industry, us being part of it, wanting to really look at when we are aiming for an ethical practice, what are some of the things that can go wrong? What are things that we need to be super aware of, and just wanting to promote and increase some awareness around that for our listeners. So to start off, we're defining the wellness industry. So we have a couple of definitions that we looked up before. Just kind of a simple Google search. Do you want to start with wellness?
Mm-hmm. So the quality or state of being in good health, especially as an actively sought goal.
Yeah, which I feel makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with wanting to be well and wanting to pursue wellness in and of itself. And then the wellness industry, we searched that as well. And the first thing that came up was the wellness economy, which is made up of industries that enable consumers to adopt healthy habits in their day-to-day lives, which again feels really on point. That makes sense. But now we're more into that consumer industry relationship, and they broke that down into 10 different sectors. So do you want to list the sectors?
Sure. And these are listed from greatest economic value, so income generated or profit globally. So this is generated globally. Personal care and beauty was number 1. Healthy eating, nutrition, and weight loss. Physical activity. Wellness tourism.
So that would be like traveling somewhere for a wellness retreat?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that kind of idea. Traditional complementary medicine.
So traditional Chinese medicine, acupuncture, things
chiropractic,
like
that kind of thing. Public health, prevention, and personalized medicine. Wellness real estate. So we actually were just reading a little bit about wellness real estate. So primarily a big influx of that from after the pandemic or coming out of the pandemic, in terms of like personal homes, building with wellness incorporated right into them. So like building in fitness studios in your home,
right?
Creating environments for your office space if you're working at home that are, green spaces, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Mental wellness, spas, workplace wellness, which is number 10, and number 11, thermal and mineral springs.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are kind of the key industries then, or categories in the wellness industry. So just to give our listeners an idea of what we're talking about when we talk about the wellness industry. So like we were saying with COVID, like that really, I think the industry was already growing before COVID, but that just kind of blew things up even more.
Right.
Especially with what we see online, the rise of information about mental health being online, Instagram and TikTok. There's been a lot of discussion about TikTok therapists and TikTok mental health experts, giving mental health advice in their little, short little clips online, and just knowing that anyone has access to that, anyone can see that, but you're not actually in a confidential therapeutic relationship, and so that can be, hugely problematic for several reasons that we'll get into later. And again, just, the COVID period that we all went through, getting everyone thinking about what it means to be well, what it means to stay healthy, the increase of like fear around health and wellness.
For sure. And, something that just strikes me when you're talking about this right now is, I think we mentioned it in our first episode, kind of our intro to what we're doing, about, the aspect of individualism and this whole sort of propelling ourselves into self-help and really being self-focused. And during COVID, it strikes me as an interesting thing to maybe explore that, we saw this kind of explosion of self-help and wellness, and in a time when we were so disconnected from others.
Exactly.
And so, somewhere in there's a disconnect of, how we need community. But in a lot of ways, or in some ways, this whole wellness push has really tapped into that individualism and that self, and like do for yourself. And, and it's almost like it just carried on out of the pandemic without, taking into consideration this whole community aspect. And I just find that really interesting when I'm, scrolling through my phone. It's just all about me. And
it's true. That's such a good point. Like, I think that's exactly what we've seen happen. And in some ways, it's been kind of like this perfect storm to really take things off. Like, when we were looking at the wellness industry and kind of the profits globally, overall it's a $4.9 trillion industry globally. Like, that is huge. And what the markets have been showing is that this is just going to keep growing. But there was a huge spike that started around the pandemic. And we don't want to come across like it's all negative and that it's all harmful. It's definitely not. And again, we'll break that down a little bit more. But in some ways, it is also coinciding with how we are having more open dialogue about mental health, and we are talking about things much more openly and making language accessible for people to understand their own experiences and their own histories, and be able to ask more questions and be more critical. And so I think it really does fall onto this spectrum where there are a lot of positives, around that, or have led up to that, but it can also swing the pendulum really far the other way, and that's where we see a lot of harm. So I think one of the things I wanted to ask is or for us to kind of reflect on is, when thinking about how the wellness industry, in itself is really positive. Like we said, there's a lot, only good can come, you'd think, from trying to be well and trying to focus on your health, but harm still happens. So have you had any experiences with the wellness or self-help industry that maybe left you feeling like some harm was done, or that something was off? It just, looking back, didn't sit well with you.
I would say, just a bit of background. So I came out of a, for lack of a better word,
tell it like it is.
Say it like it is. I came out of a cult. It was a religious cult. And so I had a prior history with sort of that whole journey, which I'm still on. But when I went through to do my yoga teacher training, that was, a lot of good. And but it was also very shocking at the same time. And I would say definitely had an impact in terms of the umbrella of wellness. You know, so many similarities in the yoga world that I was in, and that excuse me, that I experienced, had mirroring or parallel experiences to the cult that I had come out of, and definitely came away from that experience really thinking critically about, what is it that I'm doing here? What is it that I'm representing? What is it that I'm, allowing into my world, my mind, and how is this truly impacting me in a positive way? And how could this be harming people? So that was, and to be honest, I'm still on that journey in terms of yoga.
Sure, yeah.
Because I don't want to discredit, certain things about yoga, but at the same time, there's a lot to understand and a lot to sort of move through in terms of, how you use that tool in whatever way, So for me, that would probably be the biggest experience I've had.
Yeah, that's definitely complex. And I know, like, one of the things we've talked about as well is just like decolonizing the practice.
Absolutely,
and like thinking about kind of the ethics of being a white person and being part of that practice, and kind of positioning yourself as the instructor in this position of authority. And like that can be one of the things that creates like a power dynamic.
It does.
And can cause problems in any industry, but especially the yoga industry.
Yeah. And definitely in any kind of a leadership role too. And that is actually what propelled me to kind of further my education and my understanding on trauma conscious workplaces. I went on then to take an amazing program just to become more educated with trauma conscious yoga, because I was finding a discrepancy in, not necessarily how I was teaching, but maybe how everything was landing on people.
Yeah.
And so, that again, I'm still sort of digesting and processing all of that information. So yeah.
It's a lot. There's a lot there.
There is a lot there.
Yeah. And I feel like if we're going to dive into like the yoga industry, that's going to be a few episodes.
It will be.
There's so much.
And honestly, I have this book here, Practice and All is Coming.
Right.
It's by Matthew Remski, who's a Canadian author, and it's Abuse, Cult Dynamics, and Healing in Yoga and Beyond. An amazing book. I'm just kind of going through it for the second time. There's lots of resources out there for digesting this kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's an awesome one though, and it seems to have really resonated for you.
Yeah.
And just kind of like thinking back to, because I know you have been involved with the yoga community for quite a while, but that has, like you said, kind of grown and changed and adapted over time as you've grown. But like at first, when you're starting out, what are some of the things that like draw you into that community, or what are some things you think draw people into that community,
Yeah. I mean, I would say first and foremost what we talked about at the beginning, which was, people are generally good people. They're searching to make their lives better and to be contributing citizens in their communities to the greater good of, our world. And so, people maybe see yoga as an exercise tool, which is primarily in this Western culture. But also, I think, if you're generally feeling an emptiness or unsatisfied, yoga is one of those avenues where you feel like you're going to get some kind of internal resolution or connection, or and seeking those kind of things is okay, but it's not okay when it becomes that the tool becomes your answer, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, like the be all end all.
Exactly. Yeah. Instead of, your personal growth.
Yeah.
And I think that's, kind of where a pitfall is, where people kind of go off the rails, and they are drawn to maybe a charismatic personality type, who then becomes this guru, and before you know it, you've kind of, resolved yourself to saying, like, I need to deny these parts of myself. I'm following this guru.
Yeah.
And they have all the answers.
Yeah.
And it just goes off the rails really fast.
Yeah. I feel like that's so true about yoga. Like, I haven't been a huge part of the yoga industry, but just from, in part with, being in your life and being around it and introduced to it, and even just what I see on social media, I feel like, especially with things being more online, there's a lot more classes and like global platforms for yoga. There is a lot of celebrity tied to it. Yes. And I feel like you kind of have to be pretty charismatic to be a yoga instructor. Yeah. So there is this like element of getting drawn into personalities and that community.
Actually, and when you say that, like, that's the other flip side, is not just the people who are, immersing themselves in yoga, but the actual instructors. Yeah. Who, and again, I am not sitting here saying that all yoga instructors are off the rails or anything like that.
No, you're a yoga instructor.
You can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, but you do have to think critically about it. But it is, what's the word? A perfect platform for instructors who maybe haven't resolved things in their own life and fall into this kind of predatory power and control thing. And they feel so good, and they're elevated, and they're put on this pedestal, and they've got these followers, and I was very aware of that because of what I came out of. Yeah. When I went into the yoga, sector industry. And by that point, I had done a lot of not self-analyzing, but just reflecting, and I knew I could recognize the red flags, I guess. But not everybody is at that place, and maybe people are just willingly going into that without thinking critically.
Well, I think that's where it becomes kind of exploitative and predatory, is you take something that at face value is good and positive, and you mix in and you slowly sprinkle in things that are manipulative, sneaky, exploiting someone's good vulnerability or vulnerable nature, or a vulnerable moment that someone's experiencing in their life. And I think there's a lot of different snares, and there's kind of a template to it, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that sense of community, like, that can really draw people in, but it can also be a bit of a double-edged sword when you're set up to be performative. You're looking to each other for comparison.
That's right.
I think, that's one thing I've seen with yoga, is how performative it can really be. Like, you have the Lululemon, and you've got like your mirror, and you're watching yourself, and I can't do that move, and they can do it, and I'm not good enough.
Yeah, if the more flexible you are, the more spiritual you are. Those things are correlated, which is bullshit.
Yeah.
It's not the case at all.
Yeah, there's a like sneaky way of tying it to your self-worth. And I don't think that's unique to the yoga industry. I think that it's just one of the ways that it happens.
Yeah, and I mean, also to clarify, like, yoga is just one thing, but it's more the harm of the system of these kind of, like, it's really the systems of these things that cause the harm. It's not the subject matter itself. Do you know what I mean? It can be, but
yeah, it's complicated.
It can be. It is complicated.
It's really complicated.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that when we do look at where a good health movement or initiative goes wrong, often it did start out as something just really innocent or really
That's
good.
right.
You know, someone searching for something.
Yeah.
And there's also a lot that is just like, we're bombarded with information. We're bombarded with signs and imagery of, you know, you should be doing this, and if you don't, you're not working on yourself enough, or back to that individualistic way of our Western world.
And let's be honest, there's people out there that are trying to take advantage of trends, right? Like, I mean, marketing is manipulation.
$4.9 trillion industry.
Exactly. Like, so, you know, if people are watching what's going on and they see an open door and they're in there to make some good cash, or, you know, have a power trip or whatever, like, there's so many doors people can walk through to do this. And that's not to say everybody is, but it is really important to have self-awareness, to see the signs, and we can't know that without being educated on what to look for.
Exactly. Yeah, it's usually good people who get taken advantage of because you know, a lot has been manipulated or covered up, or we don't have enough of these open discussions, and we also don't make this information accessible. Again, people are just bombarded with imagery and messaging all the time, and it almost like gets overwhelming and confusing for people that that critical thinking is kind of gone. Like, you know, we were talking about this earlier, but like anyone being able to really position themselves as an expert these days, like, what does it even mean to be an expert now? And like the rise of pseudoscience and misinformation and disinformation, like there's just so much that we're up against, and that's why it's so important for us to talk openly about this, because a lot of times it can be prevented, right?
Also, just what came to my mind when you were talking is to, you know, so us being mother-daughter, and on this point of education and learning, because it is a skill, you have to learn how to think critically. You know, depending on how you grew up, you could be very affected by, you know, were you allowed to think critically?
100%.
Were you allowed to ask questions and voice your opinion and assert your autonomy? Or did you grow up in a home where, you know, everything was controlled and you had very, whatever, not that being strict is a bad thing, but, you know, we had expectations of you, but it wasn't in terms of like control, rules, you're not allowed to speak, you're a child.
Yeah, like
we're
power
the parent,
dynamic.
A power dynamic, exactly. And so, you know, and to be honest, I to some degree grew up with that power dynamic in my family. And so, you know, as we come into adulthood, we may not have the skills.
Most don't.
You know, to think critically. And, you know, I love that we're, you know, like I said to you a couple of weeks ago, it's like being a cycle breaker.
Yeah.
You know, in this generational kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's also another reason why we're excited to share education and information, and some of it
Yeah.
is experiential knowledge because we've walked through that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that also is not like a smooth, easy, streamlined process.
Yeah.
Like, we've had our moments and
Yeah.
we've gone through different stages of growth. And, I think that we want to be really clear that, like, that is a messy process.
Yeah.
And building skills, like, it's a skill, so that means it takes practice. And when you practice, that means there's times where you fuck up. Like,
Yeah.
it's gonna happen.
It's gonna happen.
But I think what has always allowed us to continue growing is, like, we've always, fucked up or, like, gone through the growth in the context of prioritizing our relationship.
Yeah.
It's been fully through relationship, and yeah,
That's a good point.
but also just around, like, what we grow up with. It's what we grow up with, but also what's around us in society at the time, because
very
that
true.
determines often what you grow up with.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
Especially with different generations, right?
Yeah,
The
exactly.
influences. Yeah.
I know we've talked about that a lot, and just kind of some of the differences and some of the overlap.
Yeah.
But, like, having access to information about mental health, like, that is something that's definitely, I would say, newer to the more recent, younger generation. Like, the open discussions about mental health, open discussions about suicide, open discussions about domestic violence. We're not 100% there yet.
No,
We have a
but, yeah.
long way to go, but there's more open dialogue happening than I think there was in other generations. And that is something we've seen change. But again, it can be a double-edged sword.
Yeah, for
Right?
sure. How about you? What have you had any experiences that were harmful in the wellness industry?
Yeah, I think when I think about that, the thing that comes to mind for me is kind of like nutrition and diet culture. Again, a little bit of that double-edged sword of the social media information
Yep.
age. Everyone is bombarded with imagery and messaging about what you should look like, what it means to be healthy. And, like, that does cause harm on all people to be overexposed to that. But for me, like, I think about when I was vegetarian. I became vegetarian in grade 8. And a lot of people who are vegetarian are using that as a way to mask an eating disorder. And that was true for me at the time. And it kind of, I guess maybe it developed into that, and I didn't know at the time, but it very much turned into disordered eating and, like, an unhealthy relationship with food and with my body. And all the messaging out there around, like, thin is healthy, that's like the biggest lie and the biggest misinformation that young girls are told from super, super early on.
Yeah.
I think, like, recent studies, I'm trying to think of the one that I saw most recently, but it was saying, like, by the age of 7 or 8, young girls are already starting to hate their bodies and think about dieting. Like, 8 years old.
Yeah.
It's garbage.
It is garbage.
And so, I think that's really where we've seen the idea of talking about health, talking about wellness.
Yeah.
It has gone horribly wrong because being in a thin body is not an indicator of being a healthy person.
That's right.
I think where it really went for me is being vegetarian. I was vegan for a little while, and I really saw it a lot in the vegan community where there was so much shame around your food choices. There was like this status tied to you, like, oh, you're a vegetarian but you're not vegan fully, well then you're less than. You're like not as good of a person as I am because I'm fully vegan, so I'm a really good person. And that is just a bunch of bullshit.
And then you can take it to the next level of the raw food.
The raw food diet.
Which,
yeah, I mean, look, there's several diets, there's lots of different ways to live your life, but you know, we've seen an increase in orthorexia, this idea of clean eating and, you know, having to micromanage, be hyper aware of your food choices, and just knowing how much that has increased anxiety, shame, right?
Yeah, and that, I mean, shame is huge through a lot of these different sort of harmful situations, group settings, whatever. And, you know, it goes really bad fast when you're using these things to shame people. And I know we're going to get into that in some other episodes, but
it's the same template.
It's the same
formula.
It is the same formula. And you know, there's a lot around that, and we're still learning. You know, there's lots of good resources out there that are legit, educated, experienced people who can kind of unwrap these things for people, and we will have some of those resources available to people as well.
Well, one of the people I've been following, actually there's two that I would recommend to kind of counter all the social media, you know, bombarding of these negative messages. There's two nutritionists. One, she's called the Nude Nutritionist. She's incredible, has, you know, cookbooks, and she shares a lot of information about, you know, acceptance of your body and not having things to be black and white, and, you know, avoiding those harmful labels where there's a lot of judgments and there's this like hierarchy. And the other one is Abby Sharp, and she's also a licensed nutritionist. She's incredible at responding to misinformation that happens online around food, diet culture. She is incredible. Abby Sharp. She's so it's so
Excellent.
important to have those resources, and you know, really thinking about, who do I follow? Who do I listen to? And if you're, you know, looking for something in the wellness sector, if you're looking to improve your health, again, there's nothing wrong with wanting to feel better in your own body and feel better in your own skin. But if we're misled, or if our insecurities are exploited by someone who's, you know, just trying to make money off of us and take advantage, which unfortunately a lot of people are, we want to make sure that we have access to people who give really credible, objective information. You know, check who they follow, check who they listen to, who they recommend you read. You know, do you find those people credible? And we did kind of a social media post about this, just like a brief, some things to look for. So you can check that out on our Instagram.
Yeah, because, you know, it is difficult with so much information. Like, how do people navigate that? What are the questions people should be asking, or what should they be doing, you know, when you're looking to source credible people and credible information? And, you know, I think asking the questions of, like, who is this person? Like, are you just, you know, copy and pasting something you saw on Facebook and you're throwing it up on your Instagram, or you're, you know, posting it on your fridge? Do you even know who this person is? Where did this quote come from? You know, deconstructing what that says. What are they actually saying, or is just some kind of positive little saying? Finding out their background.
Yeah.
Like, where did they come from? What's their education?
Yeah.
Are they part of a larger community? And even there's like, I'm a education junkie, so to speak. Like, I just love learning. So, I get on these rabbit trails and you end up on some website of some institution and it's like, oh, this looks so legit.
Yeah.
But then it doesn't stop there. You don't just take something at face value. I mean, do your research. Find out who started this foundation, who started this institute, who's running it, what are their backgrounds, We don't take the time to do that.
Yeah, no, we don't at all. We just take things at face value because, again, the rise of pseudoscience and misinformation.
And instant access, right?
Yeah, and I do think in part it is by design that we're so bogged down and overloaded with information that it exhausts our brain and makes us less sharp. It makes us less analytical. We're more likely to take things at face value because we're too tired. We're too bogged down to actually go out of our way and search for that information. Or we just flat out don't know what to look for. Right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the other things too is all the buzzwords, there's all the trends. Like, that's another thing we get so overexposed to is whatever is trending. And, it can put so much pressure on professionals in the wellness and health sector to abide by these trends, to be an expert on everything, to take a position on everything. I know, like, for us, we kind of reject that culture of immediacy and urgency where, like, I have to respond immediately, or I must respond to every comment, or, I must, post about this and share my opinion on everything. I think sometimes that can go too far the other way. But yeah, just kind of knowing what buzzwords to look for, guarantees, like, here's this formula. If you follow these steps, you'll get this result. And if you don't get the result, it's because you did not follow those steps properly, or you don't care enough.
10 days to transformation,
Yeah, it's a bunch of bullshit.
Life is not like that. We don't transform in 10 days.
No.
We might have some growth spurt or some understanding in 10 days, but no, there's no magic bullet. There's no gurus.
And also, like, what is transformation and who decides or defines when you get there? Like, we make it out to be this thing that's totally objective, but it's completely subjective.
It absolutely is. And I mean, that was a huge thing in the yoga community, right? Like, 21 days to transformation.
Yeah.
Sign up for your yoga classes 21 days in a row. It's only costs you, $2,500, and you'll be transformed. And it's like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
The buzzwords are huge. And also, I think these kinds of marketing can draw people in because, again, they're looking to this person who they think is an expert. And we've talked a lot about expert. I mean, it would take a lot for me to say someone is an expert.
Yeah.
There are people who are extensively educated and experienced in subject matters, and those people have, journeyed there over a long period of time and deserve the respect of the knowledge they have. But one thing, I think we were talking about Terry Real.
Yeah.
Who's, if you don't know Terry Real, look him up. He's a
family therapist.
Great information.
Yeah.
But I love the fact that he funny, his last name's real, but
Yeah.
he's so real.
He is.
He's so real. And excuse me, there's him and Belinda, his wife, do some stuff, answering questions and just little mini things, and they're hilarious because they're just like, don't think we just sit here and we're like perfect. We're both therapists, and we never have these problems, but we're here to help you.
Yeah.
And that kind of context can be really put out there on social media. It's like, follow me, I know everything.
Yeah.
I'm the expert, and I've never had these problems, but I can tell you how to fix yours. That is not reality either.
No.
I mean, expert or no expert, we're all human. We've all had experiences.
Yeah.
And we're all doing our growth.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I think sometimes too with the label of being an expert, it almost, at least the way I interpret it, it gives the impression that expert is like this end goal that you can achieve,
right,
where it's like, I've learned everything there is to possibly know about this subject. And I personally kind of reject that, because I think we're always learning more. We're always coming out with new information.
So true.
New research. I mean, there are so many areas that have been severely under-researched, and a lot of research, particularly in like psychology, it has been based on white privileged communities, or a lot of it has been by researching men, or just by researching white people who fit into the gender binary of male and female.
Yep.
And so we've not done enough to actually research and understand, multiple communities and areas and categories of identity. We have so much further to go.
So much.
And so I feel like we'll always continue to advance and know more.
Yeah. So another thing that we've talked about is, what does it mean to be ethical in this realm of wellness, and whatever you're doing, whether it's, you have a psychotherapy practice, or you have a coaching forum, or whatever, curious on your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, for me, being ethical in a practice, I think about being conscious of potential harms that can happen.
Yeah.
I think about I'm in a position where I'm responsible for potentially influencing someone's wellness, or what choices they make, or what information they have. And that is such a huge responsibility that I take really seriously, especially having worked in gender-based violence shelter. I see how much information and power dynamics can influence someone's wellness and what choices they make. And I do believe in empowering people to make choices for themselves that are informed based on good information, that I could never know what's right for someone else.
Right.
They can only know, but they can only know and make good choices if it's informed fully. And so that is a really big responsibility, but I don't believe that I could ever be in this position where I know what's best for someone, or I know what they need to do to like be well or feel better.
Right.
You know? So for me, being ethical always comes back to a trauma-informed practice, which to me, the main piece of being trauma-informed is promoting choices and giving choice.
Free choice.
Free choice, free informed choice, and empowering someone to do that for themselves. Yeah.
For sure.
What
I
about
totally
you?
relate to that. And, I know, because this has been, kind of a 1.5 year process for us coming to this point, in sort of stepping out and in sharing our own experience. And I really had to do a lot of soul searching as to like, why am I doing this? You know, like, why would I want to do this?
Yeah.
And for me, I mean, I'm 54. I've had a lot of life behind me. Not as much as some people, but I kept silent for a really long time. And I explained this to you, how it just seems like over the past 25 to 30 years, things have been really percolating for me. And I actually came to the conclusion that it wasn't like, I want to do this because I want to like have some big popularity career thing. It was because I didn't want to stay silent anymore, because I knew the pain and suffering that I went through and that I was feeling. And I just, from talking to people and whatever life experience, there's so many other people out there. So it was more for other people's benefits than it was for me. And I think this is something key that I've noticed in the wellness industry, is like asking the question, like, are you doing this for your own personal wellness? Like, it makes you feel good, it makes you feel powerful, it elevates you, you feel important, you feel validated, or is it because you genuinely want to put information out there? To circle back to what you were saying, is to give people choice, education, inform various things. Like, you're not alone, other people have experienced this, there are resources, there's help, there's professionals. And back to the, using these things as a tool. Skill building, even for yoga, it's like, okay, so you go do yoga and it's great exercise. Great. If you enjoy that kind of exercise, do it. If you have a more, again, I hate to use this buzzword to some extent, but it is true, a more somatic experience with something, great. However, that's only one piece of the puzzle. And, ethically, we've talked about this extensively, that we're just two people. There's tons of resources and support out there. And being ethical is also providing those other tools, other avenues, other people, therapists, which we do. I'm sorry, the scope of this is beyond us. We can't help you with this. Here's somebody who can.
There's totally times where we have to refer someone out, or, that idea of being a fit, it is a two-way street where, maybe I'm a fit for you, but I might not feel that we're a fit for each other. Just based on what is in my scope.
And I think transparency is part of being ethical too.
Huge.
Because we don't have all the answers, and nobody has all the answers. I mean, there's multiple, again, the complexity of life. And just knowing yourself and being able to say, I don't know. Like, I don't know the answer to this. I need to reach out to somebody. I need to refer you to somebody else. And, that again comes back to your sort of core values of like, why are you doing this? Is it to, I got another tick on the wall, look at how great I am.
Or money.
Like that's a huge one. Like, take this course. We're going to teach you how to be trauma informed, and we guarantee within 10 days you'll be making, a 6-figure income, or I will be. Or I will be. Or
I think that's one of the things that I think makes it easier for us to pause and consider how ethical we are in our
Yeah.
own work is because we both do this part-time. Like this
Yeah, we have other jobs.
Yeah, we both have other jobs, and this is our part-time job.
Yeah.
And so there is that slight arm of distance where we're a little bit more focused on the quality of our work. We don't have this pressure to like churn it out to make our living.
Yeah.
And so that can make a huge difference on, you know, someone being a little bit more willing to like cut corners and manipulate. And like marketing in itself is manipulation.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
So it is kind of a slippery slope of where is that line.
Yeah.
But I do think it's worth, you know, considering how does my income, how does what I charge, you know, all of those pieces around money, is that a huge barrier? Who am I targeting? Who am I accessible to or inaccessible to?
Yeah.
You know, a really good example that comes to mind for me, obviously having like a sliding scale can be a really great way to still make sure that you are making what you need to make to cover your expenses, but that you're making it accessible to someone based on what they have access to.
Yeah.
And actually the Embody Lab, who is, you know, another provider of training, online training in the wellness sector, they have a sliding scale available. But what I really like about how they did it was they have kind of like a trust process where you get to say what you can afford, but you don't have to share painful details of your past. You don't have to explain all your hardship and how you got there. And so I think that's a really great way to still provide a sliding scale, but not have to put someone through the painful reliving of their hardship.
Yeah.
Now, not everybody can do that, and they're obviously a big platform.
Yeah.
They have the financial means to do that. But I think that there's just some really good examples like that out there of you don't have to do things in this black and white, boxed in way.
Yeah.
You know, we can consider other ways of doing things.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, if somebody, and you do see this in other people who have ethical practices or organizations or whatever, I mean, the people come before the profit. That's, I even say that in my own personal business, is that, again, no, you go into business, you don't go into business to lose money, but at the same time, when the rubber hits the road, it's the people that matter. And there have been times where we've had conversations or calls or whatever. There's no fee. We just do it because we know the person is in need and they need support. And, you know, that's the exception to the rule in some cases. But the point I'm trying to make is that this is about people. And, you know, people's well-being and people's access. And
yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
I think the one other piece when I think of having an ethical practice and us being part of the wellness industry is also our conversations and our relationship to others in the industry.
So true.
And being able to have open discussions, call each other in, like, you know, let's acknowledge that, you know, maybe this isn't a helpful way, or maybe this is a barrier, and like, let's brainstorm some other ideas, or what are the challenges that you face as a professional?
Such a good point.
You know, being able to like hold each other accountable in these spaces where we're sharing information. And to me, that is a huge sign of what I can expect from this person, depending on how they respond to possible criticism or feedback.
Yeah.
You know, if you get defensiveness, we see this a lot on social media. And I guess that's the one thing that, like, you know, you can tell a lot online is, you know, hey, have you considered this perspective? Or, hey, maybe you want to consider this as well. and getting like kind of a defensive, closed off response.
Sure.
Or just like deleting, removing things so that no one sees the criticism.
Yeah.
Again, that lack of transparency.
And I think on that point too, like it's important to have people in your life that you have relationship with.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I would tend to be open to anything that comes in, but again, through the lens of critical thinking. So you're going to have all sorts of responses if you're on social media, you know, a wide spectrum of people commenting or whatever. And it's always good to at first say sort of like, okay, this response came in. I wasn't expecting that. And then take some time to really think critically about that. And then also weigh in on, you know, who is this person and do they regularly speak into your life, or do you have relationship with them? Do you trust them? Do you know them? You know? And I think that in terms of accountability, I think that's important to have an established relationship with people that you know will tell you the truth.
Huge. Yeah.
And regardless of, you know, positive or negative, you will be able to be in relationship and walk through that together.
Yeah, that's definitely ideal, and that's the best way to do it.
Yeah,
for sure. But I also think when you're in a role where you have a big influence over someone's wellness, you have to have an open mind. You have to be able to accept feedback and criticism regardless of relationship, because you are putting yourself in this position of responsibility for others.
True enough.
And I will admit, like, I have really struggled with accepting criticism in the past. Like, I always took it super, super personally. And what changed for me really was working in the gender-based violence shelter system and supporting people who had actually gone to therapists, because, you know, just like any other industry, therapists can cause harm just because you have, I think there's that misconception that just because you hold a certain label or just because you have a license doesn't mean that you have an ethical practice. It doesn't mean you're trauma informed.
True.
Yeah, what I saw happening was people who go to someone for help. Okay, you're licensed, you're a therapist, you must know this, you must get this, you must be aware of trauma. You're put into this power dynamic where you see them as the expert, and you going to them, you know, this helpless person who doesn't have all the answers. But that's not true. That's not necessarily how it goes. And people end up feeling afraid sometimes to actually challenge or question what they're being told, or it might not fit for them, but they still accept it because they're the expert. And so they end up really internalizing, staying stuck, taking it on. They walk away from a therapeutic relationship feeling shitty about themselves or feeling like a failure, but they can't really understand why that is.
So true.
Right?
I have experienced that.
Me too.
And so true, sitting on the other side of the desk, so to speak.
Yeah.
That is such a good point.
Yeah.
You know, to be saying, like, you don't know how this is landing on the person. Yeah. And their experience is real for them. And their feedback is important for us to access and consider.
Yeah.
So true.
And I think it's not always that, like, someone in that position is, I don't know. It's not necessarily, I guess sometimes they don't consider it.
Yeah.
And I would hope that someone would, in that practice, check in with the person. How does this sit with you? How does this feel for you? Because sometimes it can be almost like routine or mundane. If someone, you know, has been licensed for 30 years and they stop going to professional development trainings and they have a private practice and there's no one really encouraging them to grow or continue their learning, they're working with 30-year-old information at that point. Yeah. And so I think it's just important to really never forget the role that you have, the responsibility that you have to other people who are looking to you as a professional, looking to you for support, and just be really committed to your learning as ongoing.
Yeah.
Be open to feedback, be open to criticism. We have to keep that fire lit in order to be good, ethical professionals, I think.
Absolutely.
So.
And I think that ties into what you were saying about always giving people choice. And, you know, that was actually in the trauma conscious yoga training that I took. That was one piece I really took away from is in all those situations, because a lot of the times, whether you're doing a workshop or a class or whatever, it's with trauma survivors, and one of the main focuses is putting that power back into their hands, so that they're in charge of what they do or don't do, you know. And I think it's really, like what you're saying is really important in terms of an ethical practice, to realize that we want to steer away from a power dynamic.
Yeah, exactly.
I think is what you're saying. And yeah,
exactly. I think that making choices for yourself is part of healing, and that's empowering, and that's all we can really hope for people.
Absolutely.
So I hope that this has been helpful to everyone listening, and you know, these are the kinds of conversations we're having all the time, so I know this is kind of broad, and it's definitely, you know, we didn't cover everything we wouldn't be able to in one episode.
Not.
So it's definitely not an exhaustive list, but hopefully it gives a good overview and a good foundation. And we'll just continue the conversation. So
thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on The Wellness Dilemma.